I've made it a point lately to really emphasize just how good Hyper Offense has been recently in competitive NU play, especially in the videos covering the SCL replays, where we have seen a consistent amount of SCL HO usage. So today, I'm going to talk about HO in NU, kind of how to build it as well, because I think a lot of Hyper Offense follows a pretty similar formula that allows you to have pretty easy success when you want to build it yourself. So, makes it very new player friendly, lets you get a lot of games very quickly in a new tier if you're trying to learn it. So let's get into it. Now, of course, you've been enjoying the content as of late. You enjoy this kind of informative stuff. I've been getting a lot of requests for more informative videos, so hey, here you go. If you want more of these, of course, make sure to subscribe if you're not already subscribed. We're very close to hitting 6K subscribers, and of course, our end-of-year goal for next year is 10K, so hey, just drop a subscription if you're feeling a little generous today. And let's get into it. Now, I should also mark this team as a Freezeye team. Freezeye, kind of, but not really. Because it's not Freezeye's team, it's just very similar. There's like 1 month difference. But I want to talk about first the kinds of HO there are, because I think you could break it down into what I'm going to say just 2.5 categories, because it's kind of 2, but it's also kind of 3. You've got the standard Hyper Offense, where you've got your just little lead hazard setter, and then the other 5 Pokemon. A lot of the time 5 setup sweepers, sometimes 4 setup sweepers, and a mon that's a bit more of a supportive role. Then you've got manual weather, which we've seen talked about a decent amount lately, particularly rain. And then you've got automatic weather, which we don't have the strongest type of down here right now, but it's seen some hype, some use in SCL, and enough discussion to warrant it get a section. So we're going to talk about the standard HO that you see up here first of all. I'm going to show you this Freezeye team. Of course, if you haven't watched this video of his here, where he covered the team, talked about why he built it, and his thought process in his week, I want to say 5 SCL game, do make sure that you talk about it. We've got this idea of the lead Lycanroc with red card to dissuade people from trying to do that cheeky little, oh, I'm a lead rapid spin Pokemon and just cheese it. No, you're getting red carded out, bozo. Also dissuading the standard line of, oh, I lead Jolteon and I 2-shot you with T-Bolt. You got the standard SD Decidueye because it is just so good on this kind of build, giving you some extra speed control with the Shadow Sneak as well, while also helping you by giving a little bit more defensive presence. I mean, it's useful for fighting immunity, water resistance, also can chunk through Pokemon like Florges if you need it. Taunt Salazzle as well, because through the combination of Taunt Lycan, Taunt Salazzle, and this Rapid Spin Tatsugiri, you're able to support something like a Violite Scyther, open up a more useful item for it, him even going adamant on this team to support the Scyther even more, make this mon a true beast in the paint, and then just nice little Hariyama to round the team off, because this is one of NU's most potent sweepers, using Thick Fat instead of Guts, something that I've done multiple times when I've used Belly Drum Hariyama, because end of the day, this mon already hits plenty hard enough when you've got your +6. Guts isn't really needed, one, because a lot of the not hazards, but status move users don't actually do anything to you to begin with, but also, they're going to be kind of naturally dissuaded, I would say, from trying to inflict status on you, because Guts is just so common. It's like, there's really no point. Plus, you could always Terastallize to a Steel type, that blocks Toxic, and that's going to be oftentimes the most problematic status condition for you to combat. So, we can compare this to this one that I built. This was, of course, to showcase the agility throat spray vehicle idea, and I went with a bit more standard of a Lycanroc, also just very standard EV spreads. I didn't really put thought into it. This is just copy-paste stolen. But we got the standard Sash Lycanroc lead, guarantee my hazard. Decidueye as well. Plot Encore Salazzle because it decimates the Chanseys of the world. Can also disrupt Pokemon like Florges that maybe would give a little bit of issue to Vikavolt. Again, standard SD Scyther because it's just such a dominant sweeper. I think HO should always be running it. And then a Glastrier, which helps the stall matchup even more, while also giving me some extra insurance into opposing offense. So, the similarities between the two teams, what can we talk about? Well, I made it very, very easy to see. You see the same 4 Pokemon here. This is kind of just the core to current HO and NU. Lycanroc is viewed as the best Hazards lead because it's the fastest of your options. Other Pokemon you can consider are like Frostlass, because that gives you spikes. You can get more spike up. You also don't have to worry about type effectiveness other than Pokemon that don't touch the ground, so you can get off a bit more consistent damage with it. You've got some other options too you could consider, like we've seen Glamet get a little bit of usage in previous metagames back when we didn't have better options, because Glamet can get up every single hazard in the book that it wants to try and go for. Glamet, of course, being able to set up all of Stealth Rock Spike and T-Spike. That's pretty useful for an HO lead. Of course, also providing speed control with the Mud Shot. But Lycanroc, very, very consistent Pokemon, gives you priority. I also like CC Lycanroc a ton because of how good Scyther and even Glastrier are in current HO. So it's just a very good supportive lead. Decidueye being put on these teams because when you talk about how HO plays, I think a lot of the time, what happens with these Decidueye teams is Decid sets up a bit earlier in the game, and it is just trying to draw out Pokemon like Avalugg, Pokemon like Earthworm even, that might pose a little bit of an issue for your Scyther in the back. Decidueye is able to SD up and just smash them with the strongest Poltergeist that they have ever dealt with, and it makes it so much easier on your Scyther for later on. Of course, also, things Decid is useful for. Being able to help stave off Jolteon is a big one, because Jolteon can kind of speed check the entirety of an HO build. And so having a Mon that can tank its boosted attacks in a pinch is really good. Have a Mon that can even pick it off from full if you want to dedicate your Terra Ghost. That's also really good. Salazzle, we talked about it a little bit on my HO. A lot of the time you see this Mon just meant to help stifle Chansey. So in Frieza's variant, you see a completely utility-based approach to it, where we got Taunt specifically on this build. You probably could go Knockoff though if you want. And then on my team, you've got the offensive Salazzle approach, where I'm saying, hey, I like Salazzle as a sweeper. I think it's nice to have a bit more guaranteed of an option on the build compared to Vigavolt, which will struggle in some matchups. Like we mentioned, Florges you're probably not beating because they almost all run Calm Mind, and Chansey you're just not strong enough to take down. You'd have to dedicate something like Terra Ghost instead. And on my build, I opted for Terra Steel because I think Levitating Steel type, that sounds pretty baller. Then we got the Scyther, because once again, this Pokemon is just, it's probably the best sweeper in NU at the moment. The standard set of Dual Wing beats CC Quick Attack, allowing you to basically deal with any sort of defensive counterplay. You just need them chipped. And so this harkens back to the Decidueye point of how you have this offensive core work really, really nicely. Really, you could guarantee on either of the two helping break down, again, I'll use Avalugg as an example here because it's the most prevalent at the moment, trying to break the other physical walls down so that the other can sweep. When building HO, one of those very important things, especially when you're going with this kind of approach, is you want to make sure your sweepers support each other. So stacking Pokemon that actually have some common counterplay is very, very practical, because it guarantees you that you can open up the doors for one of the two to get a nice little in-game going. You see this always play out pretty easily with the weather types of HO, because with weather it's a lot more obvious with how that works. Like rain, for example, you have 3 water types, and water types naturally just share a lot of counterplay. Something like Floatzel and Poliwrath, they're both going to be looking at, say, a Quillfish as overlapping defensive counterplay. One of them is going to be drawing in that Quillfish at some point in the game. One of them is going to be drawing in that Avalugg. And so, you use one to wall break for the other, and you're just saying, okay, this is how I get my end game. And it works the same with this hazards-based HO, but I think with hazards-based HO, it requires a lot more cognizant team building. Because if you do not pay attention to that sort of idea, well, you could end up with, yeah, maybe you have 5 setup sweepers, but maybe they just don't really have that sort of logic put behind them. I mean, if my setup sweepers are, it's really hard to come up with a random idea, but if they just don't share the same counterplay, if maybe they've got completely different counterplay, and the goal instead is, oh, well, I don't want to stack Pokemon that all get checked by the same thing, I think that's still a viable route, but you're going to run into this issue where you might not really find a great way to sweep on a consistent basis. Because you'll just find these teams where you're like, okay, the path I take to sweep is always stifled. Because my opponent doesn't really have to go out of their way to check me. They've always got one mon they can go into. And okay, they check my sweep or I go to my next mon. That beats what they've just defensively answered one of my sweepers with. But once I beat that mon, they just go to another. So offensive cores, just like how they matter on balanced teams, matter even more on HO. Because the room for error is so much smaller. So you really got to make sure that you make the most of your momentum and that you keep that pressure on your opponent all game long. That's why these setup sweepers are so dominant, where you got this SD to Sid, SD Scyther, Belly Drum Yama type angle from Frizai here. Is just really, really overbearing for an opponent to deal with because they keep getting met with powerful physical attacker after powerful physical attacker after powerful physical attacker. And these three come together so nicely too when supported by something like Taunt Salazzle. Being able to let Scyther run the Violet, giving even more chances to set up. Being supported by Memento Tatsugiri, making it so Hariyama, when it belly drums, it's not worried about tanking a whole bunch of damage as it does that. It's not going to. It's just going to be able to safely get that setup going. And some of these mons, like we talked about, don't really require a lot to go right. We talked about how Decidueye Shadow Sneak with Terra Ghost can pop a lot of offensive counterplay. Same idea with Scyther's Quick Attack, same idea with Hariyama's Bullet Punch. Whereas with this HO, I definitely took a little bit more of an unconventional approach. I'd say Vikavolt should always be subbed out for Jolteon here, probably. But the idea, of course, is very, very similar, where I'm trying to apply pressure to a lot of Vikavolt counterplay with the Salazzle here, where I'm trying to dissuade stuff like Chansey from really doing a ton, because I've got the Encore on deck. If they try to match my Salazzle, I'm going to force the Chansey to take a ton of chip. I'm then going to go to a physical attacker where I can keep it low, start applying my pressure with them, and then I'm going to eventually bring this Vikavolt out. And if my opponent isn't careful, their Chansey might not even be able to withstand the assault. They're like one T-Bolt para away, for example, from just losing. So whenever you build with this kind of HO, the main thing to keep in mind is to just always remember, how do your offensive Pokemon interact, and what type of support maybe do you run in the last slot? I highly recommend you look at Frizai's SCL games in particular, because he's used a lot of HO, and I think he's really got the idea down to a T, where you can even get away a lot of the time with this last slot not even being a sweeper. Take, for example, the Mismagius week, where he had a Scarf Mismagius that had Memento. It's the same idea as this Tatsugiri, where by a point, you don't actually need that next setup sweeper because it doesn't necessarily add a ton to your team. Outside of, okay, well now here's another win con, but I don't need it necessarily. Instead, let's go with something that makes it even easier to sweep with what I've already got. And now we can talk about manual weather. Now I will fully admit, I don't think Sun's very good right now, but the idea with manual weather kind of comes down to this. And this can even apply to your auto weather too, where you think about your weather setting core. Because you're going to probably need 2 mods that can actually set the weather for you. If you don't have 2, well, okay. Your weather's not going to have enough turns. One's just not enough. And so, the way I look at it with this rain team is this. You've got Uxie lead. This mon is so bulky, it can always get the rocks up. And it's always going to have enough time afterwards to set rain. So you've got 2 turns you can almost guarantee with your Uxie. And then, from there, you just go to one of your sweepers. Floatzel, Ludicolo, Poliwrath all come out. And like we talked about up here, they're going to work together to break through each other's checks. And what I really like about this Ash team, which, as I mentioned in the SCL coverage video, I'm actually not sure who built it between them and Todkey. But what I really like too is this Hoopa edition, where Ludicolo kind of does struggle a lot with there being a lot of just blanket special walls that are checking it. So the Hoopa is a really cool idea because Hoopa 1 has Trick. That makes Chansey's life a living hell. You saw that in the game he played versus Elias. Trick Hoopa completely debilitated that mon and made it a non-factor. But also, think about other special walls. Goodra. I mean, I'm just Psy-shocking you. I actually think I might have a Psychick on this. Yeah, I mean, Psychick is fine, but do Psy-shock. Psy-shock just smacks Goodra around. Same idea with Florges. You saw when Joey and I used the Assault Vest Hoopa team, where we were able to very, very easily trade with Hoopas. Or not Hoopas, Florgeses. Because they just don't have the physical bulk to keep up with you. So it works as a really good lure. And just, again, we talk about support your offensive Pokemon with other offensive Pokemon that can draw in and not necessarily even beat, but help weaken and soften up the counterplay to another one on your team. Same idea with Floatzel and Poliwrath. Both of these are being checked by maybe like a terastallized Avalugg. Well, okay. Send your Avalugg out versus my Floatzel. Let's see how well it takes that Wave Crash. Send your Quillfish out versus my Poliwrath. Let's see how well you take this Earthquake. Ideas like that are just still very, very commonplace. Volbeat also being an incredible rain supporter because he's got that Prankster on deck, baby. And even have Encore and T-Wave, because a lot of the time, what people will try to do with these HOs is they're going to try and they're going to set up versus you. They're going to say, all right, while you're taking your sweet times trying to set up the ideal standards for your team to start beating me up with, I'm going to set up with this speed booster or this, attack booster. I'm going to just say, all right, you got this passive do-nothing guy out. I'm going to take advantage of that and put you 6 feet under before you can do the same to me. But when you take an approach like this, it doesn't really work like that. Because now, okay, well, you don't actually get to keep setting up because I've got the Encore. So maybe like an Iron Defense Avalugg, for example, that frankly could give this team a little bit of an issue at some point in a battle. Say like you lose your Ludicolo and Hoopa. Well, now it doesn't actually keep beating me down because I just Encored you. So yeah, keep setting up. I will slowly beat you down. It may not be easy, but it will happen. Ideas like that work. And with Sun, why do I not like Sun? Well, I think it's really hard to fit everything you need onto the team, but the same idea can be applied where you have your weather setters, you've got your Sun core, and then you've got just something that provides a little bit of utility in the back. I went with this very weird Gligar set because I think having the combo of Taunt and U-Turn, albeit a fast U-Turn here, is kind of needed. Because hazard control, when you're running this kind of Zard, is so needed, and I think you really want Spec Zard on Sun, just so you can muscle through Chansey. Now maybe this Sun doesn't need it. I could actually see an angle where instead you run Boots Charizard. But typically, you will want to try and fit some sort of hazard control. Hatchram's one we've seen too, where you go eject button, and you say, alright, I'll pivot this in on a potential setter. If they attack me, I just pivot out and bring in the Zard then, and they don't get their hazards. If they try to set the hazards and go Hatchram, well, look at that, they're bounced back. So it's all about looking at how you need to support your offensive Pokemon, whether it's through the offensive cores, whether it's through teammate help, and of course we're going to see that manifest once again with manual weather, where, and I label this for Zai's team because it's not really his, but I still want to give him credit. You got your little manual guy right there. I'll even move Sandslash up so he can be with his friends. You got your manual weather Hippopotas. You've got your weather abuser core with the Houndstone, the Lycanroc, and the Sandslash. And then you've got the extra utility where Quillfish gives you some extra pivoting to get onto the field and even just some spikes. All three of these mons really benefit from hazards. And then Healing with Shaman in the back, helping of course because you don't have a ground immunity, so you want at least something that resists ground. Healing Wish letting something like Sandslash maybe try and wall break a bit earlier and sweep later. Really, any of these can do that once you get the Sand boost. And the same idea down here, where you've got the Abomasnow with Aurora Veil even to help support one of these three when they try to set up. Beartic, Alolan, and Sandslash continuing to be a really good offensive core because their checks just overlap so effectively, while you also have the Jolteon for some speed outside of the snow, helping there. And in the last two mons, Whiscash because it gives you some hazards, also checking Salazzle, which otherwise is, I don't want to say it's like a really big problem for snow, but it can at least give you some trouble. If you don't manage to always keep your weather up, it can get really bad really quickly. And in Mesprit, because it gives you a lot of what you need defensively alongside these guys. And I went with this kind of set on this team because I just found it to be kind of interesting. And I like the idea of using Nasty Plot Mesprit to support Jolteon, because you want to be able to learn this Florges. You want to be able to learn even those Chansey. And having a Psyshock user is really, really good for that. And that's going to be it for me in this video. I hope y'all enjoyed. Hope you found this useful as well, because as I mentioned at the beginning, and I've mentioned this in a lot of other videos too, so I'll reiterate it anyway. I find HO to be the best archetype to use when you want to learn a tier, because you can get a million battles with it really, really quickly, and it lets you take in the metagame in a bit better of a way. But also, I'm trying to learn a tier, and I'm trying to learn how to team build in a tier. Maybe I just need to learn what the problems are with my team. And with HO, you can find that really, really quickly. So, hey, go build some HO. And I'll see you next time. Peace.